in our Christian life. This lesson today is a continuation of last week's lesson. I also taught Wednesday, so I'm going to incorporate a little bit of what I taught on Wednesday because I think it had some good stuff. Hopefully, right? So, how many of you were here last week? Okay, so not everybody got to hear that. So, it's good because I'm going to be doing a recap. What I talked about last week was we're talking about excellence or the search for excellence, the quest to be our personal best. And I started off with a story about how my daughter goes to this, well, all my family goes to this school, martial arts school, and they have this saying. And the part of the saying is that I am motivated, I am dedicated, I am on a quest to be my best. Winners never quit, and quitters never win. And when you think about that, you're like, wow, that's really powerful words. And sometimes we say things and we repeat things, but we really don't digest the words that are being said. You know, because we meaningly repeat things just because, oh, that's a nice saying, let's say it. But if we really think about it and digest it and allow it to become part of us, then it takes on a whole new meaning. And we talked about, for those of us that were here, I discussed with you how it was important that God also feels that we should be our personal best. We should live a life striving to be our best. For many reasons, we notice that it impacts how others view us. Daniel chapter 6, verse 3, the Bible said in the scriptures that, then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes because an excellent spirit being the seat of the mind, excellent, was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. So because people saw this, and the king noticed that he had this excellent attitude, right, spirit being in the seat of his mind, the way he presented himself, his conduct was excellent, he, a foreigner, became basically second in command over a nation. So it's important. It's important. Proverbs chapter 22 and 1 says, a good name is more desirable than great wealth. Respect is better than silver or gold. I said there's a woke saying today that says, you know, it doesn't matter what people think, you do you. You be you. People's opinion doesn't really matter. Well, in a way it does to some extent, right? If you're on a job and you have a bad reputation, you're probably not going to get a good raise if your boss doesn't have a good opinion of you, right? You're not really going to win many supporters of anything you're trying to do if you have a bad reputation. People generally do some background research. If you're going to get a job, they check you out. They check your background. That's all part of your reputation. So when you live a life of excellence, you kind of take care of that, because if you're trying to be excellent or your personal best, then your reputation is going to reflect the way you're living. And because of that, we should try to have people see us in a good light. Now, that doesn't mean to say that, you know, we should care about everything people think about us or let that affect our behavior. Because we know as good as we try to be, as good as we try to live our lives, we're not going to make everybody happy. You know, that's a fact. And there's just going to be some people that's just not going to vibe with you. I remember I was teaching a class one time, and I have to say, I was an instructor, and I was a pretty good instructor, just saying that, because my evals reflected that. And I was teaching one particular class, and I teach adults when I was a computer instructor. And the class seemed like it went well, and after the class, the salesperson called me in. He's like, hey, what happened in the class? I'm like, I don't know, what happened? What are you talking about? He's like, and he chuckled because he kind of knew. He says, I want you to read this. So he gave me an evaluation that you have students fill out an evaluation at the end of the class. And I'm reading this and evaluating, I'm like, what is this? And it was pretty bad. The student pretty much said, I was rude, I interrupted. It wasn't a very stellar evaluation. But there was 15 other evaluations that said something completely different. They loved the class. It was great, best class they ever been in, things. And that was common for me, best class they ever had type of thing. And so the salesperson just was laughing because he knew that this one person that just didn't get it, maybe he was trying to get a refund, right? Sometimes they do that. But you just can't make everybody happy, no matter how good you try, how good of a job you're doing. So it's not that people's opinion shouldn't matter to you. It should. Negative opinions, you should not let that affect your behavior or stop you from trying to live a life of excellence, okay? I talked about how a lot of the way we live is based on our daily rhythm and the way we carry ourselves throughout the day. And the things that stop us from living a life of excellence, the challenges to that, is based on a lot of this daily rhythm, the way we carry ourselves throughout the day. And there's an interesting fact to that I'll talk about later. But one of the challenges I talked about, why people don't even try to be better, is a fear of failure, right? Because they feel like if they tried and they fail, it would confirm that they're a failure. So they don't even try. They don't want to make that attempt to validate the fact that they are a failure. But guess what? The greatest successes are built on a foundation of failure. You want to fail. If you don't fail, you've never tried. And it's that failure that's going to allow you to step, if you learn from it, in another direction. So the point is not to fail, it's to fail excellently. We're talking about being excellent, your personal best. So how do you fail excellently? You fail forward, you learn. Always learn from your mistakes. That is the thing. This whole, I view life as a lesson. It's a schoolhouse. Life is a schoolhouse. Always trying to learn something. Bruce Lee, one of my martial arts legends that I look up to, always said, absorb what is useful. One of his most famous sayings. Absorb what is useful. If something happens and it's useful, learn from it. So learn from our failures. The other challenge we had was the lack of immediate consequence. A lot of times people are comfortable with drifting through life because there's no immediate consequence to the actions that they're doing or not doing. Remember, I skipped school for 60 days while I was in the 6th grade. And the reason I did that, because there was no consequence. I was a latchkey kid. I went about my own way. There was no punishment that was going to be visited on me right away. So I just kept doing what I was doing. And a lot of times that as we grow up into adults, we adopt that rhythm. And we get into situations to where we get stuck and we continue on this drifting pattern of not really going anywhere because there's no immediate consequence to our lack of having a vision. It's only later on down in life that we try to figure out what happened. If we didn't really have a plan and we didn't end up anywhere and we didn't go after something because there was no consequence to us maybe taking care of our health, taking care of our finances, immediately we find ourselves later on dealing with something I'll talk about later. There's 2 pains that dictate your quality of life. The other thing I talked about was a challenge, is we don't know what we don't know. I didn't know there was a better way of living until I heard about it. You know, we go through a life. You ever heard the saying that sometimes people, they're in a small town, and until they leave that town, they didn't know there was something else out there? Well, that was the same with me. I wasn't in a small town. I grew up in New York, the big city. People want to go there. But that's not it. That wasn't everything. You know, you think everything you need is in New York City, right? People want to go there. That's where dreams are made. Well, California, but some it's New York. But the minute I left New York City, I never wanted to go back. It's like I found this life was better. You don't know what you don't know until you experience it or until you hear about it or until somebody tells you about it. Even the Bible says, right? How can they hear unless there's a preacher? And how will they know unless that preacher is sent? I'm paraphrasing that. But you have to hear it. You have to know about it. That's why I'm telling you today so that you are aware that you can live a life of excellence. You can live a better life than what you think is good. You don't have to be average. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I feel like God wants us to be excellent. I said that I believe if we all tried to live a life of being our best, the world would be a better place. Because that affects everything that we would touch. The other challenge was the path of least resistance. Anybody remember the organ donor story? Well, I'll tell you about it. The path of least resistance. They were trying to do a study to find out if human beings are naturally lazy. That's why we don't live a life of excellence, why everybody's just drifting. And they found that in countries with the highest rates of organ donors was a simple fact that it was a default setting. When you go and you got your license, you are automatically an organ donor. You had to take 2 steps to choose not to be an organ donor. Conversely, in the countries with the lowest rates of organ donor, you had to opt in. You had to check a box to say, I'm an organ donor. That is the path of least resistance. People just didn't want to do the extra step. What does that say? A lot of us are prone to the path of least resistance. We just kind of go along. And society doesn't help. We've kind of been programmed for us. That we are more and more is being done for us. We're living in a world now of computerization, to where now sometimes your car can even drive for you. Tesla, full service driving, coming soon. I'm not going to do it. Even though I'm a tech person, I just don't buy into that. Just wait until the robots come. You think people are doing less now? Everybody ever seen the movie WALL-E? The cartoon? It's not a stretch to say that that world is quickly coming with the advances in artificial intelligence, okay? Let me not digress. The other challenge I talked about was low self-esteem. Some people won't even try to be better because they don't believe in themselves. They don't believe that they can. A lot of people today struggle with low self-esteem. This is kind of a trigger for me because when I was a kid, I struggled with that. So I know a little bit about this. You don't even try. It doesn't matter what anybody tells you, how good you are, how much potential you have. None of that matters. I've had that when I was a kid. People used to tell me this all the time. Yet I still just couldn't see it in myself. You have to see yourself like God sees you. You really have to get that into you. The Bible says, Psalms 139:14, the psalmist is talking about, I will praise you for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Realize that. Marvelous are thy works. He was saying, I am marvelous, okay? Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope. God cherishes you. Wednesday night I said, you are spectacular, and you are. You have to really believe. If you are a kitten looking in the mirror, you have to see a lion, because that's who you are. So that's just a small recap of what I talked about last week. And today I want to take it a little bit further, because one of the things that we have to do to keep on that path of being excellent, of growth, of self-improvement. How many people really believe they need to live a life of self-improvement to be the best that they can do? Okay? I'm talking about several areas that we need to focus on, because how do you eat an elephant? I've only got 15 more minutes to tell you how to live a life of excellence. So how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So I'm just going to give you a few key areas that I feel like if you focus on those, right, focus your efforts on small things at a time, but are really major, then you can make progress. First thing, write things down. Have a vision. Write stuff down. You get flashes of brilliance, have something to be able to write it down. When I'm preparing for a lesson, my mind is constantly on the lesson, and I'm brushing literally this happens. I'm brushing my teeth, and I get a flash that says this would be good. So I have to pull out my phone, stop, and write it in the notes. It happened this morning. Hopefully I put it in here. Transferring my note from the phone to the iPad, sometimes it doesn't sync. But you have to write things down, because if you don't write it down, your mind will be cluttered. Okay? Write it down. Have goals, have visions, have dreams, and have a plan. If you don't have a plan, that's a whole other subject. But you need to have a plan. You need to have a vision. It's a whole other lesson, the Bible talking about people without a vision. Focus on your finances. How many believe they should be excellent in financial stewardship. What happens if you're not? Disaster, pretty much. You don't save, you don't plan for the future, you don't give your tithe. Believe it or not, the biggest change that happened to me that really blessed me in my life financially is when I started giving tithe. And I'm just saying that as a plug, but it's true. I don't tell you anything that I haven't really lived through, okay? You have to understand that. I have some years on me. This is the year I dyed my hair gray. It's been a rough year. So I lived through this. The first time I started giving tithe, it was bad. I mean, it was bad. I went in the hole. I was doing what the government does so well. I was deficit spending money I didn't have. But that turned around so drastically. I'm not going to tell you the valley I went through, but if you have consistency, perseverance, and self-discipline, it comes out good. So have good finance. Start out by giving God your tithe. That takes self-discipline. It takes sacrifice. That's putting your money where your mouth really is. You say you believe, then that's the biggest, I think one of the biggest things you can do, because that hits you right where it hurts, right away. Okay? And then give. Be a giver. I'm not the only one that talks about this. A lot of people out there, even in the world, talk about how important it is to give. It's a principle of God that works across the board. You don't have to be a believer to know that giving comes back to you. Okay? So give. Give to those that need it. Give to those that don't even know. Just be a giver. There's takers and then givers. Try to be a giver in life. And I'm going to move along quickly because I feel it. Relationships. Be excellent in your relationships. We've seen how it's important what people think of us as far as our reputation, right? But how are we excellent in our relationship? How can we do that? I think there are several pillars in relationship that affects everything else. And that's to be trustworthy, to have good communication, okay? Be dependable. Be a person that does what they say they're going to do. And what probably the most important thing in relationships is respect. Respect is a universal commodity, and if we treat everybody with respect, recognizing they're an individual child of God, especially spouses, when it comes to, let me not do marriage counseling, but if you look at your spouse as a child of God, that's their own individual, that has their own idiosyncrasies and uniqueness about them. You don't try to change them. You see them as who they're supposed to be. And you grow together, you work with that. And I guarantee you, you treat your spouse like that, they want to do anything for you because you respect them as a person. That means you value them. It goes a little bit beyond love. We accept the fact that we love each other because we got married, but there's a difference when it's a respect thing, okay? So trust, respect, communication. I could spend all day on communication. Communication doesn't mean just talking. It means talking with understanding. Doesn't mean yelling. It means effectively communicating in a way that the other person is going to receive. So you have to know a little bit something about other people. How many took the test? I gave homework. That test was to help you understand yourself a little bit better. We all have, I'm sorry if you wasn't here last week, I gave out a personality test homework assignment. And the reason was that is if we're trying to be our personal best, we need to have a little bit of understanding of who we are. Because helping to understand ourselves really helps us to understand other people. One of the things that helped me the most in a relationship is knowing more about myself, knowing why I tick the way I do, what makes me react. Once I figured that out, because a lot of us don't know why. We don't know why we are prone to certain things. Once you figure that out, it makes it so much easier to understand the other person, okay? The key to understanding people, get to know yourself first. Get to know yourself first. So, trust, respect, communication, excellent in relationships. The other thing is excellent in your health. A lot of people neglect their own health. They're components of health, mental and physical. You have to take care of both of them. And I'm not going to get into the whole lesson on health, but I'm just going to say, eat right, take physical activity, I'm going to get into that a little bit later if I have time. Wow. So, take care of your health, mental health, physical health. Those are several areas that I've talked about that we need to be focused on improving. And I already said self-image. Let me just say, the most people trip up is comparison. A lot of people fall short in their own self-image because they're looking at another person. It's not a competition. Having self-esteem, self-respect, it's not about how good the other person is or what they have. It's about being your own best. That's why you have to set a level of standard that is yours, not compared with anybody else. It's your own. Your biggest competition in sports that I used to say, I'm competing against myself. I have to have a level that I can beat on myself. And then it's not about perfection. It's not about being perfect. You know, even though there's a Bible that says be perfect because your Heavenly Father is perfect, it's talking about a level of maturity and always trying to be better, always trying to strive for excellence. It's not about being flawless. How many people think you'll never make a mistake as a Christian? It's just not going to happen, okay? And actually getting to the lesson today, major part of striving for and living a life of excellence and personal growth is ownership and accountability. You have to own it. The buck stops with you. There's a saying that says most men live lives of quiet desperation. Let's say most people live lives of quiet desperation because we're living in self-imposed prisons. We are our own captives. Okay? People, the only difference between a lot of people is the size of the cage they live in. Has anybody ever heard that? Probably not. So think about that. Are we ever truly free, or are we working in a size of a cage that's just bigger than the other person? Maybe because it's been given to us by the amount of cage we can afford. Because we all live in a system based upon preconceived ideas, based upon childhood experiences, based upon what is occurring. And so we create this prison. I'm calling it a prison because I'm trying to free you on how we are existing. Some of us, it's a very small one, okay? But we're trying to live a life of excellence and free ourselves. So, we as an adults, mostly adults in here, carry around a lot of baggage sometimes, right? A lot of hurts, a lot of pains. They form who we are. And we carry these things and it's hard to let go. Because let's face it, life is not perfect. Bad things happen to good people all the time. Tell me, son, has anything ever bad never happened to you because of someone else? Right? And a lot of time we walk around with that bitterness. And that's a prison. Think about it. So I'm not trying to invalidate that experience, but I want to say that when it comes to ownership, you have to own that you have the power of choice. Because yes, bad things do happen, okay? Bad things do happen. And too many times, we cannot move forward because we're fixated, we're stuck on remembering the past. We're stuck in that situation. And we keep coming back to that situation that holds us captive, and we can never really be joyous, free or happy because of something that happened by somebody else. And it's kind of like keeping us a prisoner. But we have the power of choice. We can choose to not let things happen in us even though they have happened to us. Does anybody understand that? And you can say, well, that's easy for you to say. It is easy to say. It's harder to do, to get past it. Trust me. There are two pains that's going to dictate your quality of life. The pain of regret or the pain of discipline. And what I mean by the pain of discipline means like taking active steps to let go of things that are keeping you prisoner. How would it make you feel to understand and get the realization that you are giving more power every time you stay bitter to the person that caused you pain? Because that's what's happening. The more we fixate on something that happened that we have no control of, the more we are focused on that and we are holding on to that, even though it's justified, even though it's valid, we're still giving that situation power over us. We are handing our joy over to somebody that does not deserve it. Something that does not, the boss that didn't give you a raise. That, hey, I could have been in the Navy for 20 years because of one person that stood in my way. I was telling Brother Cruz, he knows the person. We're actually a small world. I was a great sailor up until one single instance in my life. I had just gotten in church, and I was transferred to a new command. I went up to Washington, got orders. I had it all planned out, just re-enlisted for these orders. And I get to this command, and I ran into a maintenance officer, and he decided he was going to change it. I don't know, he just didn't like me. For some reason, I was like a great instructor. I was a great sailor. Perfect evaluations up until this one time. And he just didn't like me. I realized that this person was going to wreck my career. So I did the sensible thing. I put in a request to get out the Navy after I had just re-enlisted. Unheard of. Nobody's ever done it. Has anybody ever heard of someone putting in a request to get out the Navy after they just re-enlisted? Did it work? Okay. So I had just re-enlisted. This is way back. It's not modern Navy. And everybody in the command was mad. You think it was immediately disapproved? Yes, but I knew there was one thing I had going for me. It had to go to D.C. They had just given me money to re-enlist. This request had to go to D.C. And I already had critical ratings attached to my rate because I had been trained specially. And what did this command do? They sent me to another school immediately and gave me another critical rating. And their justification for keeping me in was that I was a critical member for operational readiness because of my training. And I'm going about my daily miserable. I was bitter. I was mad at this person. And one day I'm walking into work and I see the command career counselor making a beeline towards me. I'm like, oh, here we go. He's like, you won't believe what I have in my hand. Like, I don't know, what do you got in your hand? He's like, your request has been approved. I'm like, what? I wasn't expecting it. I really wasn't expecting it. I was floored. And he said, not only has it been approved, but they grandfathered. I had just been in the Navy for 8 years and 4 months. And they grandfathered me into a program that was a 15-year program for early separation. And they gave me money to get out. Never heard of. I had just gotten in church, and I left it all in God's hands. I said, God, you know what's going on here. I used to do some crazy things back in the day when it comes to faith. Put in a chit to get out of the Navy. They call it chits. They gave me money to get out. And not only did I get out, the person my mentor who brought me into church, he had gotten out a year before and didn't have a job for months. I got out. I went up to New York, registered for unemployment, and I got a job within a few days. I thought I was going to have a vacation. So I told you all of that. Let the bitterness go and put it in God's hands. Because things do work around. I have lived it. I have experienced it. I have wanted to get back at people. But there's a saying that says you stand by the river long enough and you'll see the bodies of your enemies float by. If you leave it in God's hands and you don't put your hand on it, I have seen God's vengeance or judgment executed on those that have tried to do his children, me, wrong, okay? So don't give your power. Don't give your joy to other people. You have the power of choice, right? Don't let the pain of regret dictate your life. Use that discipline to actually let it go. Wow. So I'm looking at the time here. And like I said, the buck stops with you. This is ownership we're talking about. Ownership. You have to own the decisions you choose to make or choose not to make. What I'm saying is don't go blaming other people. If you choose to stick in a situation that's not good, I shouldn't get into the relationship part. If you choose to stay in situations that are not good, don't blame other people. There's help for you. You know how? Because now you're hearing it. There are options, okay? There are options. What about situations that you've tried, and you just can't seem to get out of it? You know, there are ways to break patterns. There are ways to break patterns. And I'm going to have to end this here because if I start getting into this, we would never be done because I'm kind of just flowing. So, number one, always start with prayer. I'll just tell you this. How do you break a pattern that's keeping you in a place? Always start with prayer. Always give everything to God first before you try something else. But God has other tools for us that we can use and we probably never thought about. Something new, something unorthodox, okay? A lot of people that are stuck thinking in the past. They have found that achievers focus on the future. They have trained themselves because they learned something about using tools to get themselves out of situations and to focus on the past instead of focus on the future instead of living in the past. Okay? So, what kind of tools am I talking about? Well, got my time. I'm already over my time. So, one thing I'm going to say is, the first thing I'm going to say, I'll give you just one tool, is to try, okay, emotion is the language of the body. How many people understand this? This is something new. I'm giving you something new. Thoughts are the language of the mind. Emotions are the language of the body. When you think of pain, regret, you think of a negative situation, do you feel it anywhere? Do you actually get this sick feeling in your stomach? I could think of some situations that immediately I could think of something that's going to I have to face, and I feel it. I feel it. That's how I know the mind affects the body. The other thing is the body also affects the mind. You can choose to use physical techniques. Okay? I'm going to say exercise is just one of them. And I'll give you a story real quick and I'll end it with that. Because we don't use our body enough. Our body holds on to emotion. Our body holds on to the pain of a situation. We feel it. We know we feel it. I've just told you could feel it. Okay? So, there was one time I went into class. I was training in martial arts. This was a very dark situation that happened in my life a few years ago. You could ask my wife. She knows this story. I tell you about things I lived through. And I was in a dark place. And I walk into class and I knew my instructor recognized something was going on. When you're down and when you're depressed, are you usually like this? So I probably walked in like this, not out of character for me. So he immediately calls me and he says, you need to go over here. I'm like, okay, that's odd. Usually we go in and we do certain things. It's the same thing all the time. He goes and he puts me on what we call a dummy. It's a tire dummy. And he says, I want you to start working on this. So I start doing this. He's like, no, I want you to do this. Go hard. I'm like, okay. So I'm doing that for a few minutes, and I'm thinking any minute now he's going to come pull me off to do something else. So I start slowing down. He comes over me. He's like, I want you to work on this, and I want you to go as hard as you can and do everything you know how to do. I thought, okay, maybe he's testing me. I'm going to get promoted. So, I'm really going at this dummy. I'm doing all my techniques. And I tell you what, all of a sudden my head cleared. There's like nothing was wrong in the world. I was feeling good. And I recognized that immediately I had shifted my mind by using my body. The exercise released all that tension, all that stress, all that anxiety that I was holding on to was gone. Was it still there? Was the situation magically solved? No, but it helped me deal with it, because what happens to you when you don't let that go? It causes sickness in us, and it's a perpetual cycle that can raise our blood pressure, that can cause all kinds of things when you don't let it go. So I'm just going to tell you, for one, try something new. I got in trouble for suggesting this one time, okay? I got in trouble because I told someone that was on meds that anybody know people that take, I'm not saying it might be you, but people that take antidepressants are still depressed. And I'm not a doctor, I'm not a counselor, I'm not a therapist. I'm just saying what I know. I've learned to think outside the box and think for myself. I've put a lot of time into learning different things, okay? You know, a person that's just doesn't think for themselves because they just repeat what they hear. If it's on CNN or Fox News, they're just repeating something. No thought goes in. So I tried something. And I've done extreme measures. I've went and visited Iceman Hoff and taken ice baths. And anybody want to know about extreme measures to solve problems and break patterns? I know It might be a little unorthodox. So I said, why not introduce some exercise into your routine? Just try doing something. Try walking instead of sitting on the couch popping pills and watching Netflix. What would it hurt? But it required it required them to do something, to exert some effort, to take some time out of their routine, maybe introduce a little discomfort. And because of that, it wasn't accepted. But I'm trying to tell you, trust me when I say it's worth giving it a shot. Take a walk. If there's nothing else you can do, take a walk. Did you know that most of Einstein's flashes of genius came while he was taking walks? There are therapeutic walks. If you have to, something's got you down, you're trying to break, go for a walk. And when I have an opportunity next time, I'm getting ready to wrap it up. Next time, we'll talk about more extreme measures. I'm not asking you to take ice baths. I've done it. Trust me, you feeling negative, you get in a situation, you jump in an ice bath or a cold shower, it gets you immediately out of your state. But it's in those situations that you can break a mental pattern that you're stuck in, because our body gets stuck in this, and our body keeps us in this because we store pain and emotion in our body, so we have to address that. All right, thank you. I'm going to finish that right there. There's a lot more.